well, what can we say? Gamescom 2025. I was going to report on this last week, but obviously I was away. But we did go hands-on with the ROG Asus Xbox Ally and Ally X. Both Alex and I took a look at the unit. Alex more fleetingly, I think it's fair to say, Alex.
Yes.
Interesting stuff, because this is essentially the first, what you might call, well, can you call it an Xbox? A hybrid console PC? I'm not even sure it's that. But Alex, let's begin by talking about form factor, because I think it's really simple to cover this one off. If you could imagine an Asus ROG Ally with Xbox style handles and those impulse triggers, that's essentially what we're getting here, right? I mean, I think probably the least surprising element is the form factor, but I think those handles are pretty sweet, and it did seem to make the whole unit feel quite light and very easy to use, I thought.
I'd agree with that. I would also say there's a Switch 2 right here. You can't see it. But the thickness of the handheld is actually very important for someone, I think. All of us would probably say that. I do have trouble with the Switch 2s in my hands. It's just very thin, and I need something to grip on. I think Oliver talks about having pistol-style grips on all of his handhelds if he could. Maybe, like shotgun-style grips even. Oliver, who knows? Definitely form factor, definitely one of the most positive aspects of what felt like 15 minutes with the ROG Ally Xbox X, whatever it's called.
Yes, I mean, there's not really too many complaints about that. It does actually feel quite light, but I think it is simply down to the amount of purchase that you've got. It is quite thick. I think it's fair to say both of them. I had a quick hands-on the non-X Ally as well. I also had a briefing with Asus and Xbox as well, which we'll talk about shortly. I do want to talk about the Xbox interface. I think there's some really good coverage out there, particularly from, as ever, the Forks, which is my go-to for handheld coverage. Xbox interface, it's actually really well done to a certain degree. It does give you access to all of the different storefronts. It does seem to give you access to all of the functionality you're going to need. There's some really interesting tweaks that they've made there. They have made the control sticks like a first-class citizen for accessing Windows, which I think is quite important. What I am going to say, though, is that, what can I say? If you're going to be booting up this machine and you're expecting an Xbox, I think that you're going to be a bit disappointed. It is a launcher, really, isn't it, Alex? It's a launcher, quite richly featured.
Whoa. Rich, are you saying this is not an Xbox?
Well, that's an interesting question. We're sort of talking about a more philosophical side of the whole Xbox Ally debate. But yes, I think right now it isn't an Xbox for reasons we'll discuss later. But going back to the interface, it is a very rich and fully featured interface. It can do things that other interfaces we have that have been made by the likes of Asus and Lenovo can do things that those can't. It's also interesting that you can do stuff like what is effectively sort of like, an alt tab. There's functions for that. And it's all kind of like presented almost like a console. But at the same time, what can I say? Let's put it brutally. What can I say? I found some pretty glaring bugs with the interface literally within minutes of picking it up. Xbox personnel were talking about a new build of Doom the Dark Ages that wasn't agreeing with the interface, but in the real world, there's going to be a multitude of software that may not be compliant with Microsoft standards. The first bug I had was with Doom the Dark Ages, and it basically looks like this when I tried moving in and out of the interface, just kind of hanged. There's not much I could do about that. The second time I had issues, the analog sticks stopped working within the interface, which was obviously making navigation difficult, right? On-site, Microsoft staff had to step in to get the unit working again. It seemed to be some sort of joypad or stick configuration that they could access that got the interface working again. The third issue I had was something quite different. I was playing Gears Reloaded. I went back to the Xbox full screen experience, then loaded Doom the Dark Ages. Now, it didn't ask me whether I wanted to terminate Gears Reloaded, so it went ahead and loaded Doom while Gears was still resident in memory, which hammered performance. This is stuff that kind of should be taken care of by the interface, but wasn't. And in that respect, it kind of felt a bit unpolished and unfinished. Felt very reminiscent of the kinds of experiences I've had with pretty much every PC handheld I've tested so far using Windows. Here, that front end was doing things it shouldn't be doing. It certainly didn't have the feel of a more sort of bespoke, curated console experience that just kind of works. Bearing in mind that this machine's coming soon, I think it's still got a lot of work to do on the interface on the front end there. But when it behaves, it actually seems to be pretty good, don't you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, so my experience, I didn't experience any crashes, but I didn't have as much time to spend with it, perhaps as you did, because right as I got the thing in my hands, all of a sudden Jason Rowell walks up next to me and we're talking. So I was spending a lot less time looking at the device and interacting with it than I was with than perhaps you were. But still, in that short period of time, what I did try and do is look through the menu system. And the settings were kind of some mix of Xbox settings that you'd see in there, as well as a number of more PC configurable ones. The device did have a frame rate limiter, for example, which you wouldn't obviously find on a normal Xbox. But that, I think, wasn't so much part of the Xbox PC standard, but it might have been an aspect that was provided by the Ally.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Side.
Yeah, basically all of the sort of PC tweakable stuff that you would expect to find in an Asus ROG Ally is there. It's still there, and it's still the Armory crate that is providing this functionality. It's just kind of like more gracefully integrated into the Xbox interface there. I did speak to Jason Waddle about that, and it's like, well, shouldn't Microsoft be taking care of this? And I think that's basically one of the longer term aims that Microsoft are looking to do here. And there was continually the message that this is kind of like the beginning of the journey. They want to get some hardware out there, but we're going to be seeing a lot of features coming later, so to speak.
True. And the games that I did load up on it that they had available were Doom of the Dark Ages, as well as Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which I only had very brief amount of time with. But for Doom of the Dark Ages, I can comment on the performance. It was 1080p output using DRS, but DRS was at its lowest bound, which would have been performance mode, attached to FSR 3. And it was not using frame gen when I turned it off, because there was frame gen initially on and it didn't look right. It was like 80 FPS. FSR 3 frame gen isn't meant for 80 FPS outputs. And then so I turned it off, and it was roughly around the 50 FPS area on Doom the Dark Ages first level. And that ran fine, and I alt-tabbed out of it, and then I force quit it. I didn't actually quit in the menu. I used like the functionality to quit the game via alt-tab, kind of like you would on a console, where you back out of the game and you turn it off from the game, from the menu, like you could do on PS5 or Xbox Series X. That was all fine. And then I loaded up Clair Obscur, and that was the lowest settings, 1080p FSR, performance mode, and I think it's FSR, or was it TSR in that game? I forget off the top of my head. But basically that was like 27 to 30 FPS in just the game's intro.
Right.
Which isn't necessarily the biggest GPU heavy area in the game. So it's still within the power constraints of the, this hardware, and UE5 works fine enough on it. You could probably tweak that lower in some ways. I would say reducing the output resolution would be another way to get this to be going, because 1080p is quite high. But I still think people who are taking this as an Xbox console, from even the performance perspective, need to rein in their expectations, because even, the Series S in such a location, due to the tailoring of it, would be giving you a better experience than I got just by loading it up blindly here at 1080p. But that was really it. I couldn't induce crashing, but I can only imagine that the reasons why.
I think the thing for me was that the interface issues I encountered, it was really very basic stuff. And we were in the Xbox booth where we had an extremely limited amount of time. It's not as if I was trying to make it crash or to make it misbehave. I wanted to play some games on it. And, basically it's load up Doom, leave Doom, go back to the front menu, and that seemed to cause issues. Let's talk about Doom: The Dark Ages, because you actually touched on something that was quite interesting there, which is that the default settings were effectively 540p upscaling to 1080p with on low settings across the board, which I think is fine for a handheld.
Yeah.
And the controversial bit, FSR3 frame generation, you said it didn't look right. I'd go further and say that it actually looked a lot worse and more less smooth than just running the game without frame gen at 50 frames per second. I think we both agreed on that. So I think there's going to be a case where certain PC technologies that may be fine on a desktop are just not a good fit for a handheld. And although you've got pretty much the most powerful PC handheld money can buy there, those issues aren't going to go away, right? I'm surprised that Doom: The Dark Ages was configured in that way, because that was the standard configuration, frame generation on. It just looked bad. It didn't look VRR to me, whereas if you turned off frame gen and you're in that 50 FPS region, it actually looked pretty smooth, I thought.
That's very FSR3 frame gen in my experience.
Right.
When you use it on any PC, it never quite looks right. It always has this like kind of juddery appearance to my eyes, which is why I don't really like it. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
I wouldn't be surprised if, based upon how they were dealing with VRR in windowed mode over Vulkan. So that's a Vulkan game. And Vulkan, to get VRR working in Vulkan, at least under the NVIDIA driver, it's been a while since I touched AMD and looked at VRR under Vulkan. But that requires you putting it to a DXGI interface. I think that some drivers may have that configured by default. But basically, it's not running DirectX. And Windows only really is expecting DirectX window panes, right? So there's hacks in the driver to make VRR work properly with it these days. And that might have been what we've been seeing. And as we know, FSR3, if you're in the no man's land, it's going to act very much so VSync-like if you don't have VRR. Yep. So maybe that's what we're seeing.
Even if you do, there's no guarantees. Just saying.
Yeah. But that's what it looked like. So when we turned it off, we got normal VRR play, and it was like 50, but I was just turning the camera smoothly. It looked really good, actually. So yeah.
Yep. I guess we're going to talk a bit more about Doom: The Dark Ages further on in this direct, but Gears Reloaded, I also gave that a quick go, but it just had this weird intermediate stutter. Not sure whether it was a sort of traversal or whatever, but that was odd. So I think, it was in terms of the demonstration, I think it could have been better. I think the hardware, though, is first class in terms of form factor. Screen's not bad. I mean, I believe it's the X is getting the same screen that the original Ally had. I don't really have. Maybe I've just been conditioned by poor screens with the Switch 2, but it certainly looked a lot better than that. It was okay. I thought it was pretty good. I want to talk about some of the features here, though, because, well, we couldn't actually see them, and it turns out that this does seem to be launching as a sort of work in progress product. Auto SR. Is basically they're going to be using the MPU on the Z2 Extreme to basically do a machine learning based upscale, a post process almost. So you can check out our video on Auto SR based on the Qualcomm version of it. But I understand this is essentially, to all intents and purposes, Auto SR 2.0. It will have improvements over what we saw on the Qualcomm SoC. There will be improvements there, and it had to essentially be refactored to work with an AMD MPU. So that kind of makes sense, right? It's not going to be there at launch, though. That's something else. It's like another jam tomorrow scenario, which I was a bit disappointed by that. I do want to talk about something you brought up, John, which is the whole concept of whether this is an Xbox or not, and it kind of ties into this thing that Microsoft is describing as the Xbox Handheld Compatibility Program. This is actually their version, to all intents and purposes, of the Steam Deck Verified program, which is still so opaque. I don't really know what it is. I guess it's just like you're supposed to get a playable experience of it. Xbox is actually, to their credit, being a bit more transparent about what it actually means. And they've got basically two badges, handheld optimized for plug and play titles, mostly compatible for games needing tweaks, minor tweaks. There's a Windows performance fit indicator that basically predicts frame rates of being like above 30 or above 60 frames per second, which all sounds good. And I think it might be Windows Store only to begin with. I'd need to check on that. But, the idea is basically that you're going to be able to know whether the game is going to run well on the unit or not. This leads me on to some questions I asked to Microsoft, which is essentially, okay, so you've got this rating system, but, to be an Xbox, fundamentally it's got to be plug and play, right? And so when you load the game, you essentially want the settings that Microsoft tested to determine those ratings to be auto-loaded into the game. But apparently that doesn't happen. So this is part of my problem that I've got at the moment. I don't have a problem with the hardware. I think the interface shows much promise. But the whole concept of an Xbox is essentially that it is plug and play, that you download a game, you press play, you're up and running, and everything should be taken care of for you. You shouldn't really need to be going into settings menus unless you kind of want to. You want the best of both worlds here. And that's kind of my issue with it, is that there's going to be a lot of people loading up games on default settings, and they're not going to run well on what is still a resource-constrained device. I think there is going to be the expectation from developers to actually, automatically detect that it's running on a handheld.
Right.
That's fine. But first of all, there's got to be take-up of it. If it's not mandatory, then, is there going to be that take-up? And secondly, the whole concept of the PC platform, and even the Xbox platform at this point, is that you've got titles that are going back several generations. So, what's going on there? You're not going to get those settings retrofitted. I don't think it's an impossible ask because, GeForce Experience, as it used to be, would provide what it considered to be optimized settings. Whether they were or not, I don't know. But the point is that there's this...
Right.
Microsoft is saying that they've tested however many titles. I think it's up to 1,800. But, the user's got to have access to the fruits of that knowledge, I think. And that's got to manifest in an experience that's actually rated in the way Microsoft has rated it. And I'm not sure that's going to happen there.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back to, obviously you didn't go hands-on with the Ally, John, but from everything you've heard, is it an Xbox or is it a PC or is it a hybrid?
I was actually watching through a bunch of videos as well, showing off the interface, showing games running. I'm going to say it's not really an Xbox in the traditional sense, but it might be an Xbox in the new Microsoft definition of Xbox. Right?
Isn't that convenient?
I think they're just fundamentally shifting what it is. But frankly, what I'm seeing so far, I think it's promising. The hardware looks cool. I actually like what they're doing with the interface, but it seems to have an issue that has long persisted with Windows, right? Where let's say you have a cool tablet device or you have a special looking laptop, the hardware looks amazing and you get it. And it always has this feeling. I know you know what I mean, Alex, where it's oh, you got Windows and then you get this other thing layered on top of Windows.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're just hacking in something a new interface and new features. Whereas you look at, and I'm not saying it needs to be like this, but you look at something like the iPad or even the Steam Deck or any of those types of devices, those operating systems feel custom built to support that type of hardware. It exposes a lot of hardware functions in a way that's really convenient and nice. Of course, in the Steam Deck, being able to bring up that side pane menu anytime, adjusting scaling, frame rate stuff. You can do so many things just from that little side panel, which allows you to get a very good experience out of games with very little fuss. And that is something with that hardware integration. And this is what I was kind of hoping they would do, rather than just layering in new interface stuff on top of kind of existing Windows, which is what it looks like. I was hoping that they would essentially build, and maybe they still will, essentially a gaming OS that's Windows based, can run Windows software, but first and foremost is about the gaming experience. And then they would apply this across a range of hardware. And the idea would be that, you got to make this at least as plug and play and smooth as the Steam Deck, Steam OS, right? I think Steam OS basically set like the minimum that you really need to be at. It's not all the way the console, right? Consoles are still even more plug and play friendly, but the Steam Deck really strikes this brilliant balance between offering freedom and yet a very polished gaming experience. And they can still get there because, like you said, this is very much just an early product, and it's interesting. But taking like working with an existing partner to like make a new device and then layering and stuff, like when you're mentioning stuff like Armory Crate, I'm just like rolling my eyes at this. It's like, no, this should not. Right. It's fine, but you don't want something like this as part of what should be a bespoke piece of hardware.
I get what you're saying. It should all be handled, exactly as I said, it should all be part of the Xbox package, right? I get what you're saying. I do think it does, it does boot into this interface. There's minimal access to, there's minimal visibility to the standard Windows.
I know, but it just feels like, remember Windows 8 era when you could boot to the tile menu instead, but you
mean the Metro interface.
The Metro interface.
What is that name anyway?
There was that. Actually, the Xbox requirement stuff reminded me of the Windows Vista era where Microsoft had that PC. Remember the score system?
Well, they even had that actually.
They actually had a gaming like menu you could open up. You just click games, and all your games had these like nice huge icons in there, and everything actually felt like they were moving in a pretty cool direction. And they just scrapped it all and went Metro. I don't know, man. So I think there's a lot of potential here.
There is, but it's I agree. I mean, I did speak to the Xbox team and Asus. They basically were holding briefings, and the intent is there to basically make this like a proper Xbox machine, right? The question is really how far can they go and how quickly can they go? I mean, it's disappointing that there are features that I really wanted to see that could really sort of make this device stand out, but it's kind of like, okay, it's coming next year. Auto SR, for example, I think is going to be quite an interesting experience on a handheld based on what I saw with the Qualcomm version of it. But it does seem to be a lot of stuff that, yes, they're looking into it. For example, there is the sense that there's almost a retrograde step here because, let's be honest, the Series X and S front end actually was really good and had some really great features.
I agree. I feel like they should have just built. I mean, they could have built on that.
Quick Resume,
right?
for example. Quick Resume would be really good for PC. So I did ask, are you going to bring Quick Resume to Xbox PC? It's like, yes, but we want to do it. So in the short term, the answer's kind of like effectively no, because it's basically a nice to have feature when they've got a whole bunch of critical milestones they need to meet, which I don't think they have yet. So yeah, that's kind of like the essence of it. There's still so much to work.
So Rich. You can drop out to the desktop that they show, right?
Yeah.
And I will say you can do this on the Steam Deck with the Linux desktop as well. But one thing the Steam Deck still has going for it that none of these other handhelds seems to have, they may look ugly, but those little trackpads on the Steam Deck are useful. Incredible.
Yeah, that's all.
They actually make mouse navigation viable in a way that's not the case when you just have analog sticks.
Yeah, they've tried their best there. The analog sticks were never able to do that without sort of intervention before in the past. So that's a good thing. But, again, some crucial things here. On the plus side, it does appear that there have been power optimization, so you do actually get decent battery life. Again, that's all going to come out when the reviews happen as to the extent to which they've been able to make that happen. Sleep, though, I don't know. Is that going to work properly? The Forks actually asked some questions of Microsoft on that and wasn't particularly satisfied by the answers there. I mean, putting a handheld to sleep is actually crucial base functionality there.
Extremely crucial.
So that's a bit of a concern. Performance, let's talk about this. I don't like what they're saying about the non-X versus the X unit. They're basically it's the same error that they made with Series S and X, which is to say, okay, the Series S is our 1440p machine and our Series X is our 4K machine. That hasn't been borne out by actual games. And they're saying with the Ally that it's like, okay, the non-X Ally is a 720p machine and the Ally X is a 1080p machine. And that's not going to happen because every game has a different performance requirement. You can't make those claims. Because, one game, you said it yourself, Alex, we had Doom the Dark Ages running at 50 frames per second on the Ally X, and Clair Obscur was more like 30, right? And, so obviously different games have different requirements, which means that there is inevitably going to be some points where it's going to make a lot more sense on your Ally X to reduce the output resolution to 900p. Or even 720p on some really challenging games. So where does that leave the non-X Ally? And the answer is, well, effectively, it's got horsepower in the same area as the Steam Deck, and that's not going to be good enough for a range of games. And I asked Microsoft about this because, I'm not particularly impressed by that sort of that sort of way of selling the two units. And they basically said, well, basically you're going to be paying X amount of money for one level of performance and, Y amount of money for an improved level of performance. And, the whole 720p, 1080p thing, that's not the right way to market it, I don't think, because there are going to be games on that non-X Ally that are just not going to be able to produce a good experience. And that's not great for a new machine that's effectively running with a revised version of a processor that came out with Steam Deck in 2022. And this is coming out at the end of 2025. So, pricing as well. These are two ways you can look at the $900 for the Ally X, which is to say, compared to equivalent devices using equivalent silicon to the Z2 Extreme, it's a good price. But compared to the comparative performance offered by the standard Ally, and especially the Ally X, which basically solves the memory problems that the Ally had, you're effectively paying a huge amount more money for an iterative bump in performance. So yeah, I don't really know how this is all going to shake out. I heard an interesting thing from Chris String from the games business, because we had a chat about this for the games business. And his contention is this: it doesn't matter that the more expensive Ally probably won't, the more expensive Ally probably won't sell a huge amount of units, because it's all about hours played. And basically the most committed gamers are going to be buying the Ally X, and they're going to be spending a lot of hours on that, and they expect within those hours, for there to be a certain degree of monetization. So it will be successful by Microsoft's internal metrics, but in terms of the traditional metrics by which we consider a machine to be successful or not, if it doesn't sell a huge amount, Microsoft probably won't be too concerned about that. I mean, a $900 console, would be ludicrous. And yet here we are, which again says to me that this is effectively a PC, and similar to other handheld PCs, more of a niche market. John, what do you make of that?
Thinking about it, for me, it's this weird rollout strategy where they say, oh, this is just the beginning of the generation. And I kind of wanted to ask you about this, what you think. Like, do you think it makes sense to go with this sort of strategy of slowly rolling out these different kind of split hardware platforms in this way, slowly building up to something? Or do you think it would have made more sense to like essentially get all their ducks in a row and come out in a more big, bold way with like a very clear strategy of like, this is what we're doing, this is the type of hardware we're releasing, this is how our software is going? I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but more like something Apple would do, right? In a way where it all feels very unified. Like, people always joke about features that Apple adds to their products. Like, oh, I've had that on Android for years, right? But the reason they say that is because of the way Android is kind of built and rolled out, is that it all feels like this like staggered kind of thing where you're just kind of bolting things on and stuff's coming in slowly, and they don't necessarily make as big a deal out of it as they perhaps could, where, Apple will roll all these things up into one thing and then execute it perfectly, usually. And then presented to the audience in a way that gets people excited. And I feel like Microsoft's missing that, like, that key element of presenting all of this in a way that gets the users excited.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. The other thing that really concerns me is the fact that it is using established technologies. They could make us, if the rumors are true, obviously the next generation Xbox is going to be using next generation components from AMD, not older ones or existing ones. And Sony, if the rumors are true, handheld and full console, again, based on the same architecture, very forward-looking architectures based on machine learning and improved ray tracing support, which isn't in this unit, which isn't in the Ally X, and especially not the base Ally. So it seems to me that Microsoft is more moving towards embracing PC, not just the forward-looking aspects of PC, but basically that there's this massive array of devices out there on PC, which games developers are kind of having to accommodate. It does feel as though it's come maybe a bit too soon, but at the same time, I still think there's so much work to do on Windows as a platform that they need some sort of frontier device to get out there.
Sure. This could be that.
So that's kind of the way I see it.
One more thing I was thinking about from the hardware design is I kind of wish they had leveraged their experience with the Surface products, because I feel like Microsoft Surface products, like the physical design of those units, is second only to something like Apple. Like, they really make these really sleek looking pieces of equipment, and I feel like that also plays a role. Whether we think it's important or not, but like, I think having something that's like a really eye-catching design would have been awesome here for like this whole rollout, and it's something that the Surface team could absolutely have delivered, I think.
Yeah, I think essentially they went for an established partner that could deliver the product that and has some traction already. The problem, I think, when you're moving into the market for the first time is that your first generation product is always a bit lacking. And that especially is true for the original Surface, come to think of it. However,
not true for the original Xbox, though. That was pretty sweet.
I think
it was unique.
Going with ASUS, they've basically able to tap into the experience that ASUS has had with essentially 2 generations of handheld, and this is the third.
True.
So I think that's probably quite a good bet for them. Let's take some supporter questions, actually. Jiminy the 26th asks, good morning, afternoon, or night. Just cover all the bases. I'll keep this one short and simple. Is the Xbox Ally interesting? Is this Xbox quote-unquote dipping their toes rather than jumping into the pool? Hope Richard got better! Exclamation point. I like that. Still a bit croaky, but doing all right. Is the Xbox Ally interesting? I mean, it's interesting, but I'm just not sure I'd spend $900 on it. And I do think Microsoft is... I'm not so much. I don't think they're sort of dipping their toes. They're sort of, if you want to continue the sort of analogy, they're sort of continuing to slowly submerge.
Yeah.
Starting with the dipping of the toes. This question from Spodlude. Hello, Richard. I hope you're feeling better. As a ROG Ally X owner, one of my biggest frustrations is the lack of reliable sleep functionality. I hear the new ROG Xbox Ally continues this omission. Is Microsoft rushing this product when it lacks basic features in this regard? I understand it with the original ROG, which is just a handheld PC, but to attach the Xbox name to a product that lacks such a basic feature seems to me as though it could tarnish the brand. What are your thoughts on sleep-wake? Cheers. I think we've covered that already. I think this is one of the crucial foundational elements of a handheld device that needed to be comprehensively sorted. And I was looking for positive messaging from Microsoft to say, hey, look, we've got this. Don't worry, guys. And it doesn't really, unfortunately. So based on, what we saw at Gamescom. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I think ultimately my sort of final takeaway is I think we're going to get a really good PC handheld out of this. And it will be a handheld that evolves over time and gets better, gets new features, will further distinguish itself from other PC handhelds. I'm just still concerned about this core concept of what an Xbox actually is, which is to say it's an accessible way to play games. How accessible is this? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Any final thoughts there, Alex?
Well, for me, I think Microsoft doing it slowly is just a resources thing. Perhaps it takes a while to roll these things out, and they want to get there quicker. because of feedback, Microsoft is kind of, I don't want to say they've left Q&A to the users over the years, but they kind of have in terms of how they take feedback on for Windows. And they've kind of done some reversals with Windows, as well as, changing features in Windows based upon user feedback. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see here, where over time the device is going to change based upon the people who are reviewing it and the way users kind of react to it. And that's maybe a positive thing. But in the middle period, it'll be less positive when the device is not fully featured. For me personally, I actually don't give a damn about the device. I just want to see what they use this device for to change Windows dramatically, because Windows is in dire need of that. And this device is kind of like their spearhead into the initial push, at least, for changing Windows for the better.